Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of our Saturday morning art clinic online. We are so grateful to have some incredible DC artists, including Lenny Campello and Cory Oberndorfer, who is presenting today. We first want to thank all of our supporters and our contributors who have made our mission to support and promote DC art as possible. So I'll thank you for all your small donations and things like that. We are able to kind of continue our mission. I want to first introduce Lenny Campello, who did an art clinic online presentation probably in our first couple talks, yeah, way back in 22, yeah, 22, when we started this program. So we are grateful for Lenny to kind of set the stage and set the standard of artists early on. Lenny has been kind of one of the, I'd say, fathers of our program in a small way because I always felt that Lenny has done an incredible job promoting DC artists and has been part of a large part of his career. And hopefully, we've kind of helped contribute to his mission of making DC one of the art capitals of at least the United States, if not the world. So I encourage you all to go back and check out his early presentation he gave for us about his work and his experiences. Sometime in the future. So all these talks are recorded and stored on our archives. But so without further ado, here's the great Lenny Campello.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that really, really very, very accurate introduction. uh, so, as Jordan said, it's my pleasure to be here again and honored. Um, I am here to introduce our guest today, Cory Oberndorfer, whom I know for many, many years now, uh, both as an artist. We've done many art fairs together over the years. Um, so I'm very, very familiar with him as a person because, as Jordan also knows, when you're there 4 or 5 days together for about 10 hours a day, you get to know the other person quite well. Uh, and that has happened with Cory and I probably, I don't know, a dozen times over the last 10, 15, 20 years or so. Cory's one of those artists that sort of fits the mold. I think that most artists need to kind of go to, which is to not to be able to explore various facets of art. He's quite an accomplished painter, and in delivering paintings, and we'll talk more about this later. At least in my opinion, he uses quite a quite a range of even sometimes risque materials, I would say, in the difficulty factor. So he's an accomplished technical artist as well as a very intelligent one in the presentation of his works. He's a painter, he's a printmaker, and I use the word printmaker very, very carefully here. I'm talking about real prints, not reproductions of paintings, which drives me crazy when those are referred to as prints. And anybody who's a printmaker should applaud that because what Cory does is etchings and taglio etchings and things of that sort. And we'll talk more about that. He's also an artist that very intelligently has taken the work. Some of his work is influenced by some of the great names, and I'm sure Cory will talk about that. But he expands that into new modern progressions of these artists' particular work. Um, he has also explored doing murals, which having failed miserably myself at trying to do that for a while, many, many years ago, I know how difficult and hard it is. Um, Cory, in the last few years, has focused a lot of his work in 2 or 3 series that I'm probably going to butcher the names. Um, One of them I'm very familiar with deals with ice cream and pops, and you will see here one of the superpowers of artists in taking those kind of mundane subjects and elevating them kind of to a sublime level. When we talk about them, he has a popsicle series, and then there's a series done on artists. He's a artist from our area. And the last thing I'm going to say in the introduction, because it's also a lesson for artists, is that Cory is a superb professional in presentation of works. That is so important if you're an artist specifically, and even more importantly, if you're in the process of being at a major art fair someplace, right? So I count him as a handful of artists that has never ever from me needed a correction in presenting his work because he's really, really good at that. So I hope he also talks about how important that is and how he came to be so well experienced at doing that. So Cory, my first question to you is, unless you want to say something before I start quizzing you.
No, keep telling me how great I am. Nice. Yeah.
uh, my I mentioned already about how in your work you explore different substrates, different processes, different medias, and one of them is how you work with spray paint. So tell me how you got started in that and how until and to be honest with you, until Cory described that to me, I would have been in awe of the great gradations and the way that his work sold, but there was nothing like showed up immediately that would have given me a clue that he used spray paints in some of his work. It wasn't the kind of stuff you see in graffiti artists, things of that sort. So, um, walk us a little bit about in your work how that came across initially and how you do the technical process of delivering that. And if you want, you could even discuss in which kind of the ice cream or pops or the popsicle series, whatever you use that mostly.
That could even be part of your presentation, Corey. So if you wanted to go into your presentation, that may be answered in there too.
Yeah, I'll be talking about that. Yeah, the spray paint really, I mean, I like to explore pretty much everything because I'm all about learning new mediums, new techniques, all of that stuff. Like, the end result isn't as interesting to me as like, how can I do this a little bit different? And when spray paints started becoming more commercial for artists, where it wasn't just like the Krylon. There was very specific brands like Montana, and they started having a wide range of colors. And I was like, okay, now I can dig into a new medium and play around with that. But yeah, I'll get to that in my slideshow, which I'm gonna go ahead and start with that. So today I really wanted to talk about the popsicles. Um, I was like, how can I focus on just like one thing because I'm kind of all over the place quite often. Um, and also I'll go back to what you were talking about for presentation. The one thing I would encourage every artist to do is work at some point for a gallery or museum so that you can learn basic art handling techniques, basic presentation techniques, learn a little bit of carpentry, and work for a frame shop. All of those skills really have helped me out over the years. Um, I so before I get to the popsicles, I have to kind of work my way in there. I was doing a series of imagery, and this was in grad school and a little bit after, when roller derby had a resurgence around 2005. It was becoming very popular again. And I started using the roller derby skaters as kind of icons that I was creating within my work. And for me, they were representing, strength, independence, empowerment. And then I usually juxtaposed it with something very sweet and innocent. So basically, I had these warriors fighting, sweet expectations, literally in most cases. And so that was my first entry into kind of creating these figures that weren't portraits or depictions of really specific people. But it was more about just like creating that icon and how I can reuse that figure. And then I would put it up against something cute and sweet that most people like. And a lot of it depended on color as well. I always wanted something that really popped in terms of the color. And again, like I had a small collage, a larger like 4 foot painting. I was doing murals. This was at the Katzin Art Center while I was still in school. Um, they told me I could paint the walls on the first floor as long as I painted back over it. And then it was winter break, and I just like painted all the walls in the building without permission. So, sometimes just go ahead and do things. um, so with each of these, basically the icon was also interacting with the other elements, even if they were just colored dots or stripes or something else that, were abstracted, but also reminded us of something very specific. Um, and I kind of liked the play of just creating characters. So I could have the character of the derby skater in, I don't know what the relationship here is between her and the gummy bear, but there's definitely some sort of tension happening in there. And so I had fun playing with that. Um, More of these. Again, I always wanted that kind of interaction happening in there. And I would repeat figures multiple times. So just depending on the context. So I was very much about once I've established that icon, then I can place it as or use it as a placeholder in different scales. Very much a graphic design mindset. Is it going to work as on a business card and on a billboard at the same time? Like, not everything can change to scale like that. Um, so I was definitely enjoying that challenge. And then it eventually led to this image right here, which I think I was going to do as a collage. For some reason, it looked great on my computer, but I didn't really know where else to take this. And so I think I may have made a few digital prints of it, but for the most part, it was a work of art that just kind of got pushed to the side. But this is the very first image of the popsicle in my work. So this would have been about 2007. And it was just an image that I found online, manipulated it, stretched it a little bit, changed the contrast, enhanced the colors, some of that basic stuff. Um, and the reason that I had this was in roller derby, they all, or at least back at that time, came up with their own names. So very much like a wrestling mentality thing. And this skater's name was Snot Rocket, which I loved. I think that one's hilarious. And so I placed her next to a Rocket Pop. Now, I grew up calling them bomb pops. Some people know them as rocket pops, firecrackers, depending on the brand and kind of the region of the country. So I thought it'd be hilarious to kind of have Snot Rocket and the Rocket Pop next to each other. So fast forward to a couple years after that, I believe, I created this work, which is a 5 foot tall spray paint bomb pop. And I made this one for a friend who designed my website. And so we did a trade. I'd make him a painting and he'd give me a really beautiful website at the time. So this is the very first spray paint one. When I look at this, it is so crude and basic, but also the shape, the basic image has not changed over the years. But it gave me the opportunity to choose a medium that was different. And the one thing that I liked about spray paint is it would give you texture. So every little bit of pigment is, tiny little granules. So they kind of get sprinkled on there. So just like the frozen surface of a popsicle, has that iciness to it. I liked that the texture was different. And it could also be soft transitions in there, while also contradicting like the really hard edges. So once I started investigating this, I started making a lot of them. And the size doesn't change, the shape doesn't change. And so basically, I'm just making additions, but each one is handmade and very different. Uh, Probably I'm the only one that can really notice the difference between a lot of them. But the one thing I also liked about this was having the void background. probably the biggest criticism I would get from people that look at it. They're like, oh, but what if the background was this color or you had this going on? And I'm like, no, I want this thing that is enticing. And, it's meant for consumption. It's meant to be appealing with the color. And I like the contrast of the emptiness in behind it, which I think most people don't quite get or interpret that way, um, which is fine. Everything exists in a different way. I also like that there's always like a drip happening in there because it's not being interacted with. Nobody's eating it. And so it's just slowly going to melt and decompose on its own. So once I did the bomb pop, that was the first one. Then I just started running through the whole series. I'm like, well, I gotta make all of the treats in there. So I went with one of my favorites when I was growing up, the orange creamsicle, and of course all the flavors of the twin pops, which you always try to break those in half, and it never works. It always breaks in the wrong spot. And with these, I really liked that each color kind of had its own personality. And also, I started discovering that everybody has their favorite. And I loved the conversations I would have with people about like the memories that they associated with popsicles, whether, it's at like the swimming pool or the ice cream truck coming down the street, or in DC, going down to the National Mall, you still see all of these ice cream trucks. This was also one of my favorites, the orange sherbet. So once I got into this, then I was doing photo shoots with ice cream so that I wasn't just pulling images online because I wanted them to have a certain quality, a certain lighting, melt and drip in a certain way. So I was really just creating things with a specific intent at this point.
Cory, you mentioned that the first one was rather large. Are these also pretty large scale?
These are all the same. These are all 5 foot tall, and they are all spray paint. And most of them are pretty much done by hand. I tape off the edges so they're nice and crisp. I have like a couple pieces of cardboard that I use to create stencils when I'm building my shapes. But the amount of stencils is kind of minimal, or not as much as you would think. So a lot of it is just learning the medium, learning the material. I talked to some graffiti artist friends to get some tips. Um, and there's an artist, Tim Conlin, who was living in the area at the time. He helped me out a lot and giving me some tips. And look up his work. Uh, I've always wanted to do an exhibition of what I refer to as aerosol realism, of just like creating realistic things using material that's usually thought of as graffiti. There's so many different types of bomb pop flavors and colors. For the most part, I tried to I tried to stay away from characters, like the Tweety Bird or Ninja Turtles or whatever, because I didn't want to introduce other intellectual property in it. This is Buffalo Bill, which was not an existing character. It was just specifically for the ice creams. Of course, I like these things because the noses are like never in the right place or the faces are all distorted. So, that stuff always entertained me. Um, and snow cones also. Again, I like the icy texture and the rainbow spectrum of the snow cones. So I was working on these for a few years, and I was doing a lot of repetition with these. So, I've probably made hundreds of them. I had dozens of bomb pops over the years. And for me, the repetition is just like practicing things over and over. The more you practice it, the more you feel like you're actually doing a better job each time. So I had an exhibition in South Carolina, in Charleston, and that was the first time I actually got to show all of the popsicles together. And in the back, you can see some small gouache paintings also, which is the first time I tried working with gouache, which was great. basically just the same popsicle series. So at
No,
that time,
I don't know if you've noticed at the fair. Sorry for the quick interruption, but I wanted to point this point out. I don't know if you noticed at the fair how, at least what I've noticed, the people that get attracted to them and make comments are also always kind of isolating the handle part, the wooden part, because man, you got that down pat. You know, the grain of the wood, which to me is incredible that's also being done, I assume, with spray paint.
yeah,
But that is such the ability to deliver that as a really really believable, hyper realistic part, I think also is one of the striking points of the work.
thanks. Yeah. That was one of those things where I had no idea how to do it. And then once I figured it out, I'm like, oh, this is a really simple trick, which I'm
But
not
then
going to
I also just realized, as you know, my own work has blank backgrounds like that with a small figure.
Yep.
I also realized that, yeah, that's kind of, it's
Uh,
complimentary.
yeah, we've talked about the strength of negative space. There's a lot of power in negative space. Um,
Or as my son used to say when he used to look at them when he was little, Dad, when are you going to finish that?
yeah.
Oh, no. Cory, do you use spray paint cans or do you use a
Yeah, it's all canned. It's all air. Yeah. Um, I have not gotten into airbrush yet, which I have the airbrush, but I just haven't sat down to you know, I feel like that's gonna take a long time to master.
right? Thank you.
So I was doing these for a while, and then I had at the same time I had this exhibition, I had another exhibition at Black Rock in Germantown, Maryland. And I didn't know what to do for that show. And the fact that I had two solo shows going on at the same time, I was trying to figure out how to make them different, and I was ready to do something different also. And that's when I remembered that I had seen the Roy Lichtenstein retrospective at the National Gallery of Art. And it was amazing. It was way better than I expected. I'd up to that point, I respected his work a lot, but with most pop art, people interpret it as a little too one note-ish. But the breadth of his work and his approach was amazing. And one of the things that he had was they had a whole room of artworks where he was taking other artists' work, famous works of art, and interpreting them in his own style. So in this case, he took Monet's Rome Cathedral paintings and created them in his Binde dots. And so I decided to start riffing on that. And so for this exhibition, which actually came together in maybe 2 months from when I decided what I wanted to do. And then I was like, oh, this is the show. I have to create a whole new show for a really big space. Um, but it's one of those moments where, all of the ideas flooded to me, and within 10 minutes, I had the entire show laid out and designed, and then it was just executing it. So it's great when you have those moments. So I started riffing on other artists' work, but instead of doing their work in my style, I thought, well, what if I did my work in their style? Because I'd already created these icons and repeated imagery. And so I just wanted to figure out how I could manipulate those icons that I had created. So with these, just again, repetition of that bomb pop shape. So we've got like a take on Ed Ruscha's paintings as he introduces text over the image. And again, I was able to use the spray paint here to get some of the soft quality of the works that he was doing at the time, which he didn't use spray paint. He used a lot of acrylics, and I still don't know how he gets some of the textures in there. Um, Working with Christo's wrapped pieces. So this was the first bomb pop that I actually sculpted. So there's a sculpture, a painted sculpture wrapped under there that you can see when the light hits it just right. So I liked being able to make a three-dimensional version of the imagery. I also played with Jasper John's inverted flag, where if you stare at that white dot long enough, then and close your eyes, then you have an after image where all the colors get flipped. So I created that with the bomb pop with the red, white, and blue. So if you stare at it long enough and then close your eyes, you get this reverse image or inverted image. And that was probably one of the hardest things to do. Again, playing with Jasper John's repeated numbers. And so I took all of the popsicles that I had done up to that point and, created contour line drawings and overlapped all of them. So, in each of these, there's a wide variety of mediums. This was charcoal and Conte crayon on canvas. The others were spray paint or working with, fabric and foam. I took on Ellsworth Kelly's, abstracted color blocks. He was always an artist where I did not care for his work. And the more time I spent with it, the more I appreciated it. And this is when I was like, yes, this is actually what I'm trying to do. And so with these, I've got the orange creamsicle and a raspberry creamsicle. But also with this, the titles of these are Pantone numbers because for me, they look like Pantone swatches, especially with the white there at the bottom.
Cory, when you exhibited these, did you give any indication of who you were mimicking in the titles or in a piece of paper or something, or
Yeah,
did people just have to guess?
so with these, I set it up like a museum exhibition. And so I had the text on cards, on the wall text next to it. And so it was written out as if it was a museum text with the titles and then a brief explanation from, the curator, which was me. So I would talk about the background, but also, make it sound really important as museum-y as I could, which was part of the installation. So yeah, I played around with Magritte's This Is Not a Pipe, which again for me was like, what is the image we're looking at? How do we name it? With this, it's not a pipe, it's a painting of a pipe. And so I kind of always just love that artifice of what are we looking at? And, is that thing we're looking at what the artist wants it to be, or does it represent something else? And just the meaning behind the image itself always changing.
Hey, Cory, I want to highlight what Jordan asked because for any of the artists listening to this, that point, the point being having visual text information about the work, in my opinion and experience, is sometimes a critical part of exhibiting artwork, not only in a museum setting like you did at Black Rock, but in a artwork as a commodity setting like at an art fair. Jordan and you probably notice how people come in and they look at the work and then they immediately go to the card next to it to see what they can find out. And then what they do, they take a picture of it if they
Yeah.
want it as a reference to walk away. So I think that's a key part of the whole universe of displaying artwork.
And the artist can control how much information they want to provide, and put it in that context. Yeah, this is a sculpture based on John McCracken's planks, his like really finely crafted marble reflected planks. I was like, well, it was just a popsicle stick leaning against a wall. And so that one was fun to do too. And Klaus Oldenburg soft sculptures. I really wanted to do a soft sculpture, and so I taught myself how to do button tufting, so that it looks like it could be a couch or a headrest or something, but also just have this sagginess as it hangs off the wall, which also makes it look like it's starting to melt over time. And so I really liked the presentation of that. And I was finally able to include an ice cream sandwich, which I couldn't otherwise because just viewed from the front, really boring. And I didn't do 3/4 views on anything else. So this was a way of introducing the ice cream sandwich. Of course, Pollock. Everybody wants to do a drip painting at some point. And I figured the chocolate eclair was a great way of doing that. So in this image on the left, I have a take on Robert Rauschenberg's Erase de Kooning, where he had de Kooning make a drawing and then he spent forever just trying to erase it, and that was the work. And so I took one of my orange creamsicle paintings and then erased it using like acetone and sanding and a whole bunch of other techniques. In the middle, that's inspired by Ellsworth Kelly's spectrum paintings, and also a little bit of Morris Louis paintings and Washington Color School in general. On the right-hand side, it's a riff on Andy Warhol's shadow paintings and also his diamond dust paintings. And it was actually a glitter spray paint, which is the worst thing in the world. You do not want airborne glitter. Yeah, learned my lesson there. It looks really cool, but I can't photograph it either. It's really difficult to photograph. Continuation of some of these, Ed Ruscha, who's a great artist to look at for just like manipulating images and playing around with how it's presented to artists, to the audience. Lichtenstein. So this was the first one, and I really like some of his early work where it wasn't perfect. It doesn't look machine made because a lot of his early work, you still see like all of the deviation in how he was making the dots, which he was really using really crude like screens to like push the paint through. And so I kind of embraced that. Mel Ramos's keyhole paintings, which his work very like, I would say of the time period, very sexist in objectifying the female figure and making it voyeuristic. But in this case, I'm just objectifying, a popsicle, which really that's all it is like an object of desire. And so I'm able to kind of flip that expectation. So at that point, then I really started looking more at the artists that inspired me, and especially the artists that were just, I would say, image makers. So they're more focused on how they manipulate the image and present the image to us. And so the context gets flipped. Of course, Warhol's like one of the most famous, everybody made fun of him just taking it Campbell soup, and that's supposed to be fine art. But then he would also do things like he had a series of electric chairs, which are just newspaper photographs that he would take and start to use those images too. And it's like putting the context into fine art and also, something colorful and interesting, but deadly. And he had a whole lot of series of works that don't get a lot of attention, I would say. But Warhol was really exploring some interesting things. I started looking at Chuck Close, who is very obsessive with a limited amount of imagery, but also like kept changing how he was presenting things. His early work, the photorealism, like this self-portrait here, but then he would also play with, pixelated prints or paper pulp prints, starting to do one of his signature styles here of just concentric shapes within each pixel and adding color to it. I mean, all of these are just self-portraits, so it's repeated images that don't change that much. It's just how he presents it. Or collages like this, which are some of the more interesting things. I don't know if they're as finished and polished, but I really like to see his process. Another artist that I really got into that's definitely about image making is Vic Muniz. And I feel like he doesn't get as much recognition as he deserves. But I think it's hilarious to make a cartoon cloud in the sky with just a basic skywriting plane. So everyone in New York could look up and see this. I think it's hilarious, but also just changes how we think of a cloud that we see. He also did more clouds with cotton balls. So he would just pull them apart and photograph them so they start to look like clouds. And he started taking on other artists' work as well. So this is a Manet painting, but it's all just collage, just images that he pulls from magazines. These are probably about 5 or 6 feet wide when he starts doing some of these, so they're really large and get really complex. But I liked that he's playing around with essentially painting, but using it in collage, and we start to look at things differently. Or his Wasteland series, where it's just trash. If you haven't seen the documentary Wasteland, watch it. It's fantastic. So this is a take on Death of Marat, but it's all trash. You can see toilet seats in there and old tennis rackets and clothing and all of that stuff. Or his take on the Gustave Courbet painting as a puzzle. But the longer you look at it, the more impressive it is, because each puzzle piece had to be presented knowing exactly where it was going to be scattered. So it's, yeah, it boggles my mind, the complexity of this one, but I love it. So again, he's just taking recognizable images and finding a new way of giving them to us. And the best part about that is, especially if it's an image that is so already embedded in our culture, then it jumps right to the manipulation, because everybody has this common bond. And the one thing I like about pop culture and pop art in general is like there's a shorthand because we already share some common experience in the past. All right, so getting back into my work, at this point I started abstracting things because I just wanted to play more with shape and color. So again, repetition of the bomb pop. That was one of the first ones that I started with. And of course, like the banana fudge or Hawaiian punch. So I could take that same repeated shape and just play around with color. These are gouache paintings about 10 inches tall. So again, playing around with a different medium so that I could experience something new. Of course, like a Klondike bar. Back to a Ellsworth Kelly influence. Those shapes are directly pulled from some of his work. And just really simple collage. So I found some marbled paper that I thought would be great for like a strawberry shortcake or chocolate eclair or toasted almond. And just, take these as direct riffs on the stickers that you see on the side of the ice cream trucks. Um, and the scale of these is about the same as those stickers. I went out and got a ton of the stickers that they put on ice cream trucks. And to do so, I had to get licensed as a ice cream vendor, which was super easy. I just, you have to go to the right place, fill out a form, and then they will give you all of these free stickers for advertising. And so technically in Prince George's County somewhere, I'm licensed as an ice cream vendor, I believe. So I got to bring back the ice cream sandwich here. King cone, the first time king cone appears in my work. Um, which also starts to resemble like a Jean Arp painting or sculpture. I definitely wanted to bring in another character. So this is a deconstructed Ninja Turtle. I forget which one has the red mask. I'm sure someone out there knows, but I wanted to have fun with that. And also the fact that those characters had the bubblegum pieces that are never in the right place. And so I had to put everything off center intentionally. Um, so then the next series I went into was I really wanted to start using really crafty things, things that you would do with your kids at summer camp or something like that. And so I used Shrinky Dinks, which I had not used since probably I was in the third grade back in the 80s. If you're not familiar, it's basically like a sheet of plastic that would come already made with designs, or you could draw on them, put them in the oven, they shrink to like a third their size, and then you could use them as keychains or decorations or I don't know what. Um, but I started doing my whole series of popsicles. So this one is about an inch and a half tall. And then I got back to glitter, which I did not want to use because I hate glitter. Glitter gets everywhere, but it's really pretty. And I also knew that it would capture, again, that icy textural quality of a popsicle, reflecting light. So I talked to Jordan Wine, who's an artist that works in glitter, asked her for a few tips, and set up as my wife refers to it, a kill room where our garage is just lined with plastic. And I go through so many rubber gloves, and I make these um, glittery. And again, the photographs don't do them justice. When the light hits them, they're very pretty. Um, and with this one, I even played around with different types of glitter. So it's not, I see a lot of paintings where they use clear glitter that they put over a painting. And it always looks like a cheap trick. And so I use colored glitter, which makes it really saturated. But in this case, I have two different sizes of glitter. The entire cone itself is really fine, so it doesn't reflect quite as much unless the light hits it just right. And then there's a larger glitter up on top. So even with this, we have two different types of reflected qualities to it. And then also working with like really cheesy materials. I did a Lego piece. So this one's about 3 foot tall. And I had to find just the right colors. And so I became a Lego expert going onto websites where you can, buy and sell and trade to get like really limited rare colors because I wanted just the right color range in this. Um, and since then, since I made this, Ai Weiwei has started making giant Lego pieces also. So you had like a giant Monet painting. I like to think I did it first, but I'm not going to brag about that. Um, so then I also got back to printmaking, which I hadn't really done too much since school. But I had worked as a screen printer to work my way through college. I was doing commercial screen printing on t-shirts and stuff. So I knew the process. And the first one that I did was the Roy Lichtenstein one. Figured it was best suited for the medium of screen printing. And so I started doing limited edition prints. And then I got a residency at Pyramid Atlantic, so I could make as many prints as I wanted, which was great. I did it in 2020 during the pandemic, uh, which was a scary time to be there, but also I had the entire print lab to myself for screen printing. So it gave me a really nice opportunity. Another screen print, this one inspired by Saul Bass, who's a graphic designer. You've all seen his work at some point. He was big in the 60s, 70s, doing a lot of movie posters, Alfred Hitchcock stuff. But then he also went on to design a lot of things like the Quaker Oats logo or Pan Am or AT&T or whatever AT&T was before it was AT&T. Um, but I like taking a graphic design approach to this as well. And he was always one of my heroes. And you've seen a million takes on his style over the years. But with this, then I was able to kind of simplify things. For this design, I actually made like cutouts of each thing so that I could have that handmade cutout look to it rather than just doing it all in the computer. Of course, I had to take on Warhol. A Klaus Oldenburg drawing, his drawings and prints are amazing. And all of the artists that I was looking at from like the 60s, 70s, early 80s, mostly known as painters, also made a lot of prints. And so that was my inspiration was, taking artists that are known probably primarily as painters and making a print series as well. So again, revisiting, what I had already done with the larger works. I learned lithography for this one, working with a printer to help me out there. Robert Indiana work. My first intaglio etching that I did. So I worked with Susan Goldman to work through this process, and I won something inspired by Jim Dine's prints. And so, they're such a complex process to be able to do this. I don't know how many times, I drew on the plate and etched the plate and reworked it. And I really ended up liking how this one worked. So we get the whole lineup of some of the basic shapes in here. Uh, and this was the initial study, so I could work out some of these things. So I just have a black version of it, but then with some of the test prints, I've gone back in and used watercolor to play around with it. All right, so getting to some of the last works that I've done here with the same imagery is kind of building on that Saul Bass print and using his shapes here. So I created this mural at Culture House in DC. Um, so that I really liked the repetition. All of the colors back there are different flavors. So you can see cherry, orange, blue raspberry, grape, strawberry, lemon, lime. So I always think of colors and flavors kind of interchangeably. A lot of times if I talk about colors, I'll say the word flavor and vice versa. And also a really weird thing that happens when I'm mixing colors. If I mix the color just right, my mouth starts to water. So I actually have like a response to it that's uncontrollable. It's super weird. But for some reason I have that connection. This was my kid. A shameless plug for my kid, who's a year older now. But also, I found a little ice cream truck, and I was like, I can't not get that. So this was the exhibition inside that went along with the mural. Um, so again, repeating some of these images, but changing the scale. So instead of the 10-inch gouache paintings, these are acrylic. These are 4 feet tall. So I was able to revisit them and see if they held up the same way. And I think they did. I really like them, that scale as well. Playing around with flavor ice or ice pops or otter pops, however you decide to call them. Which is also inspired by Joseph Alber's Interactions of Color, one of his works in terms of the layout. You probably wouldn't really recognize it unless I pointed it out. Again, getting back to some Saul Bass work, I pulled some elements from uh, some of his designs, like the multicolored road in there, I pulled from something else. Playing around with the drips. And I liked this as a way of having representational imagery, but simplifying it and deconstructing it a little bit. So for me, again, like, how do I take something that we all know and just like use it as a starting point? So again, I like repetition of imagery. So the same mural that's outside, I also have it as a smaller painting. And I have them individualized so that I can highlight each different type of treat that we have in here. And also I can introduce soft serve ice cream, which wasn't seen previously. So that brings me back to this one, which is the last work that I've done. I had a friend that won a commission, and they're like, we really like the roller derby stuff. And I say, well, I haven't done that in like 12 years. So I wanted to revisit it, see what would happen. I gave him a few mock-up designs, and threw this one in there, and they actually liked it. And so the one thing that I had difficulty making 15 years ago or whatever, because I didn't want to paint things realistically back then, I liked working with found images. But having painted bomb pops for, a long time now, I was like, oh, maybe I will revisit this. And so I made a painting where I felt like I could do the popsicle justice at this point and have that contradiction of something that had the painterly qualities, but then also have that really flat screen print looking paint quality to it as well. And so I kind of liked the full circle of taking something that only existed on my computer back then, and being at the point where I was ready to finally make it into a painting. That's it. That's the slideshow.
Cory, do you realize that your entire body of work is almost like a giant dad joke kind of rolled into one? I mean, you're doing popsicles in pop art, and then there's a humor, like a good humor to it, like a good humor. I mean, like it's like primed for like your fatherhood. It's all leading up for this.
Yeah, it was all leading up to me being a dad. I mean, when I people ask what type of art I make, and I'm like, oh, well, most people call it pop art. Oh, what kind of pop? I paint popsicles. Yeah, there
But
was,
even the whole idea of pop art was you're taking something that everyone knows
Mhm.
and then making it fine art, but then you're also doing the same thing. Well, you're taking something everyone knows, but also educating them about all these other artists that have kind of shaped art history at the same time. So it's just like it's layered, it's like an onion of layers of kind of complexity to it, but it's relatively a pretty simple form and a simple image.
Yeah.
And this isn't really a question. I'm just floored by the brilliance of it in a way. I did have one small question before. I'm sure Lenny will bombard you with amazing, more articulate questions than this. But when you're thinking about, I don't know, like just the legacy that you leave. I mean, what do you kind of aspire to be the person that somebody eventually mirrors or mimics in the kind of the same way that you're mirroring another person or another artist? I mean,
I mean, that's not up to me. I've always thought that, so early on, I thought that most of this work I was making, I leaned into the kitschy nature of it, which is risky because in the fine art world, everybody's like, nope, it's one note, it's kitschy, that's it. End of story. But I kind of knew that my work would look very different in a lifetime retrospective, so like 30, 40 years later, we can look back at everything and be like, oh, there was a lot going on. But even I don't know what all of that is until it's come out.
but you do a good job of like harkening back to previous bodies of work and bringing them into a new format. I mean, there has to be some sort of like, I don't know, subconscious that's leading you through this kind of journey, right?
I think it's a way of me being able to pull from different skills, which we talked about earlier. Like, I like to learn a little bit about everything. And so if there's some sort of common theme throughout, then as I learn a new skill, I can figure out how to fold that into my toolbox with everything else, whether it's repeated imagery or just like the process itself. Um, so I was going to go back to two things that you mentioned. Number one, when I started out with a lot of my work early on, I had an exhibition in Charleston, South Carolina, with all of the roller derby stuff, with the other treats, candies, toys, things like that. And I titled the show Novelty. And I did a mural like with the show title there, but it was in the logo of like the popsicle logo, popsicle brand logo. And I liked the word novelty because in the grocery store, like popsicles are the novelty aisle, right, for frozen things. But also, like anything that we think of as pop culture or just like mainstream appeal that everyone thinks as being more one note, like you use the word novelty. And so I really like that word play. And I also had an exhibition where I did a series of murals that leaned into wordplay as well. And it was all Valentine themed. And I had people submit things like, what's the worst thing anyone's ever said to you, or the best thing that a loved one has ever said to you? And I took those things, it was like an anonymous survey or whatever. And there was a lot of crossover. I would read these answers and I'm like, wait, is that the best thing or the worst thing? Because our language is so fluid. And you can take a phrase like, I couldn't love you anymore, or I couldn't love you anymore. And I really like the fact that, oh, wow, like that can either like devastate you or just like lift you up. And so even with the imagery, I feel like you can do the same thing where, you can manipulate it either way.
Did you end up putting those on conversation hearts or something?
Yeah, so I did a wall that was all these like floating conversation hearts, and then it actually went from one end to the other, from like negative to positive, or what I perceived as negative to positive. And then in the background, I also had as kind of a background filler was the chemical diagram for oxytocin. And as it went along the wall, it would break down. So anyone that was like a science nerd would get it, but otherwise, it was just made for a nice little pattern for me.
And talking about language, there is a comment in the chat that I don't quite understand, but maybe you can. Ellen said, are you categorized in a sort of copyist vein?
I guess, yeah. I mean, for me, that's the best way to discover a process or a medium. In school, there's always an assignment of like, recreate this artist's work or something in this style. And when I'm trying to figure out like, okay, well, how do I work with the oil paint? How do I work with the abstraction? Or anytime I introduce something new, like, yeah, look at the people that kind of mastered that we all look at, and you're going to learn something from it. And so definitely.
This
I
is like
wouldn't,
an
I wouldn't,
education on fine art history.
Mhm.
Sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead, Lenny.
I wouldn't categorize it as copyist. If anything, I mean, there's a certain heavy degree of influence. I would say more work influenced by such and such, because with perhaps the exception of Warhol, all these works, or the vast majority of them, are works that take an artist's approach to how they depicted their own work and reinterprets it in your subject matter. So that's, I think that's different from, and I'm glad you mentioned the art school assignment of which we all had to do, of copying somebody's work and then doing a work in their style, that kind of stuff. But I think it's more in most cases you've sort of reinterpreted someone's style and then represented it with your subject matter as as closely as possible in your mind how they would have done it, or somebody like them.
Yeah, that's why I talk about, instead of doing someone else's work in my style, I do my work in their style. And so also I have to flip my ego to be like, well, I'm the prime thing here. But if this other person like was trying to mimic me, how would they do it? And so that was kind of a fun assignment that I gave myself.
And I think Cory, also, um, as you go over the years of the work that you've delivered, I think one of the important lessons here and things that for all artists is the fact that you keep exploring different ways if you were to have started with the more abstracted work that you're kind of doing later on, as opposed to the others, it would still work in a reverse way, and it reminds me of I think I highlights the importance of exploring different ways of presenting your work, not just getting stuck in one way of doing it over and over and over and over, like some artists do, and it works for them. But I think it's Picasso said God invented the ant, the aardvark, and the elephant. He has no real style, so he must be an artist, because it's good to go to explore, different ways to present an object. I can't remember the name of the guy that used to do all the little bottles on the shelf all the time, over and over and over and over.
Randy.
Yes.
Or Andy?
Yes. And at one point, after you see like 100 of them, you kind of feel sorry for him a little bit, thinking, wow, maybe if he would have lived.
But I also get it.
Yeah. Oh, I get it too.
Yeah.
Like you, I love revisiting the same, you know that it's the same figure over and over and over and over, different things. So yeah, I get it as well. Uh, but sometimes I wonder if he was doing that today, if he would have, one day would say, you know what, I want to do it this way today.
I mean, then you go to the Visionary Art Museum to look at like those weird obsessive people that like have a singular vision.
Question, two questions actually. For the last painting that you showed with the rollerblader,
Mhm.
roller derby skater,
Yeah.
was that painted on?
Yes.
That was
Yeah,
painted.
painted. Yeah.
Okay, and then the other question is for your shapes when you're spray painting, do you
Mhm.
ever put down tapes? Can you just spray paint a straight line?
No, so all of those edges have to be taped. Yeah. I mean, it's so difficult with overspray to avoid that. And so those edges where I want that stark contrast to the white background, those are all taped and cut.
Thank you.
This was brilliant, I think, Cory. It's wonderful.
Okay. I was, this is a technical question. I wanted to know about how you apply your glitter. Do you do it with a brush? Do you spray it? Or when do you do it? Because I have some things that I'm doing with glitter also, and I understand the problem of it getting all over the place.
Yeah. It is sprinkled on.
Okay.
So I have an adhesive. I use kind of essentially a matte medium or gloss medium that I put down and then sprinkle everything onto it, let it dry, totally dry, and then shake off what's
Okay.
left.
That's what I'm doing. I just wondered if there was a better way.
Not
Thank you.
that I've found yet.
Cory, what year did you do those walls in the Katzen?
I've which times?
Yeah,
I've done murals in there a few times actually.
the big murals where you painted all of the walls.
The roller derby ones, that was 2007 to 2008. Yeah.
Because I was seeing that, I remember seeing that when it happened, when you did it. But I it we can talk about this offline, but I think it might be a great idea if you wanted to revisit that as an Alper initiative at the Katzen, and I could certainly help you out with that, because that might be something that they'd be super interested in doing. The I don't know if you're up to doing the entire ground floor of the Katzen, but at least the outside wall of the
Yes,
Katzen.
bring it.
Okay, well, we'll talk offline about that, because I
Yeah.
think that they might be really willing to go for something like that, and then maybe at the Alpers area inside the museum, then the paintings. So it'd be like a little bit of both. But we'll talk about
So
that.
a little bit about that. And the reason I wanted to do murals was my background was originally in the theater world. I was doing a lot of set design. That was my initial thing that I went to school for. And so I really like creating larger spaces for people to exist in. And so when you're designing a theater set, like you're designing an environment for those actors. When you're doing a large mural installation, you're designing a space for people to be enveloped in. And so, again, all of the weird skills that I have in my lifetime, like they all kind of repeat in different ways. Same thing when I was talking about the Black Rock show. When I know that I have an exhibition lined up, the first thing I do is go to that space and I think about what works are going to exist in that space and how they all work together. And so I plan the entire show before I even make the first painting, because I think about it as an installation. With the Black Rock, it's a large open space and it's really difficult for paintings, especially like smaller paintings or work on paper. Like that space can kill the work because it's such a big, wide open space. But for me, I thought it looked great as like a museum space. And so that was one of the reasons I laid it out that way. I have a
Any
question for
final
everyone.
questions for our artist?
I have a question for everyone here. Like, what is your favorite ice cream truck treat? I always have to introduce this question.
Okay.
Personally, I have not met an ice cream I didn't like, so that's kind of I had to think. But I think the orange one is probably was always my favorite.
Ice cream sandwich.
Say much? Yeah.
Yeah.
Me
orange
too,
cream.
ice cream sandwich.
Okay.
Chocolate eclair pop.
Yes.
Rainbow pop.
The Klondike.
Klondike.
I mean, honestly, do you just have like a freezer full of subject matter to work with?
Everyone asks
Research.
that, and ironically, no. But I
You're
do
like, I
like
don't
the
even like
days
ice
when I have
cream.
to do like a photo shoot to get my source material. Yeah.
Maybe at the next fair, we should have a little mini refrigerator or freezer full of it, and
Yes.
when somebody gets something, we'll give them one.
Yeah, you buy something and you get, yeah. But I like asking that question because then I realized like we all have these common experiences. And especially, no matter what your background, or how diverse or different we are, like I've found that the reason I chose the popsicle was almost everybody has some memory of it and some experience and some like favorite flavor or story that they can tell me. And I like that shared connection and being able to communicate that way too. And trying to find an image, a single image that can work like that, it's kind of limited.
Well, Cory, they'll end on that perfect statement. That is really a great encapsulation of your body of work to me. It's just really incredible. So we want to thank you again, and also Lenny for the great introduction. And in 2 weeks, we'll be back again. So we'll check in with my schedule. I'm drawing a blank. I think it's a Kami who's actually presenting too. So we're going to switch our gears back to some ceramic work, Japanese-based artists. So it should be really a lot of fun. So. Join us again in 2 weeks. We'll be back at the Art Clinic Online. And thanks again to everybody for being here today.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.